Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we... What?
I
thought you were trying to interrupt me, and I was like, oh, what's wrong? We better restart. What's going on?
I was giving you appropriately scary background music there,
yeah.
Josh.
All right. Now I know what we're doing. Let's go again. Here we go. Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. And I've been eaten by a shark.
Oh, no.
My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am here in the water with my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, first mate of the Orca.
All right. So what does that musical accompaniment mean? Well, we are here at the premiere of our 15th season. Is that right, Jason?
I think is it 15 or 14, Dave? I don't know.
15th season.
Oh.
Amazing. We're here at the premiere of our 15th season to talk about the movies of 1975, a landmark year, really, in cinema history. And we are beginning, as always, with the box office champion. And this is a landmark film in terms of the development of the blockbuster. It is Steven Spielberg's Jaws.
Perfect timing, coming out right at summer. Listen to us on the beach.
Mm-hmm.
If you see a shark warning, don't go in the water.
Yeah, just listen to Awesome Movie Year instead.
Some of these towns need your summer dollars, but we are here for you to tell you, don't get eaten by a shark.
Yes, that is our public service. Thankfully, here in Las Vegas, no sharks in Lake Mead, I don't think. Although maybe if the water level goes down enough.
There's a whole shark reef exhibit.
That's true. I don't think the sharks in the shark reef exhibit are going to eat anyone, though. They're in an aquarium.
I mean, you could create a movie where like a supervillain, sucks them in via some type of saltwater cannon and then shoots them at people.
Sure, I've seen enough ridiculous shark movies that I 100% believe that could be a film.
Shark cannon.
Yeah, there you go. And all of that stuff really began with this film. It is the origin of so many bad shark movies, but this is a good shark movie. It was hugely successful at the time it was released. Of course, it was the number one film at the box office in 1975. It grossed $132 million worldwide on that initial release. And over time, including all the various re-releases, it has grossed $476.5 million on its budget of $9 million, which was an expanded budget. This was a movie that went over long and over budget, and they ended up spending a lot more on it than they initially anticipated, but money well spent, probably.
Yeah, I mean, look, we did 77, talked about Star Wars, and I think we even mentioned it there. And we talked about Close Encounters also, but this was the birth of the modern blockbuster.
Yeah, I mean, this along with Star Wars are really kind of the two pillars of that, as we did talk about, I think, in our Star Wars episode. And prior to the release of Star Wars, this movie held the record as the highest grossing movie of all time from its release until the release of Star Wars. So for about 2 years or so, it was not only incredibly successful at the box office, but the other way that it kind of birthed the blockbuster was it was one of the first movies to get a nationwide release, which was not something that was really done before this. Movies would open in like New York and LA and then expand across the country over time. And this movie opened in, I think it was 450 screens, which now if a movie opens on 450 screens, yeah, that's a small release. But at the time that was unheard of.
Right. This is, like the blueprint for so many things: marketing, tie-ins, toys, ancillary revenue streams. And it is a worthy historical film because it's still great.
Yeah, I think this is one of the first movies to have an extensive TV advertising campaign, which is sort of unbelievable to me because it's not like TV wasn't a big deal prior to 1975, but I guess maybe the movies didn't feel like it was a major part of their marketing. I don't know.
I don't know either. I wasn't on the marketing team or alive back then.
No, nor was I. So this was also an acclaimed film. It won a ton of awards, including 3 Oscars. It won the Oscar for Best film editing, best original score, and best sound. And it was also nominated for best picture. Tons of other awards, including 5 BAFTAs it was nominated for and 4 Golden Globes. It did win the Golden Globe for best original score for John Williams, as brilliantly performed by Jason at the beginning of this episode.
Thank you. I think John Williams would be proud. It's just another interpretation of his music.
Absolutely. I think you need to get on stage with one of those orchestral performances of John Williams music.
And me and Bobby McFerrin could just a cappella it together.
Absolutely. And critics were mostly positive about this film, although, as always with some like classics like this, it's interesting to see where some critics were not as positive. But to start off with something very enthused, Roger Ebert said, Steven Spielberg's Jaws is a sensationally effective action picture, a scary thriller that works all the better because it's populated with characters that have been developed into human beings we get to know and care about. There are no doubt supposed to be all sorts of levels of meanings in such an archetypal story, but Spielberg wisely decides not to underline any of them. This is an action film content to stay entirely within the perimeters of its story, and none of the characters has to wade through speeches expounding on the significance of it all. It's a clean-cut adventure without the gratuitous violence of so many action pictures. It has the necessary amount of blood and guts to work, but none extra. And it's one hell of a good story, brilliantly told.
When I was watching this time, I thought really one of the things that they did so well was like every motivation of every character or every action was related to the story, right?
Mhm.
Like there was no kind of B plot or anything like that. And I think it just really ratcheted everything up to the degree that we know it to be in this thing. It was just like you said, it contained to Amity Island and the paranoia and fear that comes along with this.
Right. Yeah, they did. You're right that there's essentially no subplots or anything. One major thing that they did change from Peter Benchley's novel, which is what this movie is based on, and Benchley himself wrote early drafts of the screenplay, was apparently an affair between Matt Hooper, character played by Richard Dreyfuss, the oceanographer, and the wife of Martin Brody, the police chief, played by Roy Scheider. They have an affair, and I don't know how that worked in the book, but I mean, I don't even know if they barely speak. They have that one scene where he comes over and they have dinner or whatever, but I don't think that would have made any sense in the context of the way the movie goes.
Right. I mean, I guess the point would be like, hey, they're out on the ocean together tracking this shark, and they have nowhere to go but to face each other. So
right.
They have to stare down that conflict. But one of the crazy things about this was like you're mentioning the script, but there was like, there's that famous quote, like we had no cast, we had no shark, we had no script. By the time this was in production, Carl Gottlieb, who's, an actor in this also, was basically writing the script as the production was going.
Right. Which is perhaps another way that this movie anticipated the modern blockbuster, where you read this, I feel like about half these major, $200 million plus movies where they're like, yeah, we didn't really have a script when we started. And you'd think that would be the first thing you would lock down. But so many of these movies, especially they're built around action sequences, right? And sometimes I think directors like Michael Bay, they come up with these big set pieces first, and then they write some connective tissue between them later. So it worked out very well here, though.
I know it's crazy how it did because, as we know, the shark, doesn't work most of the time. And that's why Spielberg chose to shoot it. Like, he references Hitchcock where like you're less is more. You're letting the imagination of the viewer think about like what a scary monster this is.
Right. And of course, that's a very, very famous aspect of this movie now that was obviously like a great choice. And it's fascinating to know that was necessitated by that. I mean, you have to wonder, obviously Spielberg is incredibly talented, but you have to wonder, like, if they'd had the shark working, the animatronic shark working perfectly from the start, what would this movie have looked like? And would it have been as effective?
I'm going to say no.
Yeah.
I mean, usually when we see like, I guess it could go either way because it is a shark. So it's an animal that we know, right? Sometimes you see like a monster movie and then they reveal the monster and you're like, oh, that? Okay.
Yeah.
But it's a shark. So
it is a shark. And there's in addition to that animatronic shark, there is real footage of great white sharks that was shot in Australia by Ron and Valerie Taylor, who were lifelong conservationists and put out a lot of documentaries about sharks and undersea life. And that's an important contribution here as well.
Yeah, when they were building the shark, they said that they were trying to train a great white, like a show pony or something like that. And
Yeah,
shockingly, that didn't come to pass.
clearly not the way to go. So Pauline Kael in The New Yorker said, in Jaws, which may be the most cheerfully perverse scare movie ever made, the disasters don't come on schedule the way they do in most disaster pictures, and your guts never settle down to a timetable. Even while you're convulsed with laughter, you're still apprehensive, because the editing rhythms are very tricky, and the shock images loom up huge right on top of you. There are parts of Jaws that suggest what Eisenstein might have done if he hadn't intellectualized himself out of reach, if he'd given in to the bourgeois child in himself. It's not only the visual techniques of Jaws that are different. The other big disaster movies are essentially the same as the pre-Vietnam films, but Jaws isn't. It belongs to the pulpiest sci-fi monster movie tradition, yet it stands some of the old conventions on their head.
Eisenstein, we're really digging deep into film history today. That's the Russian filmmaker who would show an image and then show a frame of someone looking at the image, and the reaction was always the same, but because of the image that was shown before it, people in the audience would think like, oh, he's sad because he sees a hungry cat, or he's happy because kids are playing, or whatever it is. So just chalking up a little film history here, Pauline Kael. We're with you.
Yeah, Sergei Eisenstein, I think, is his director of Battleship Potemkin, right?
That sounds right.
Yeah, I mean, the inventor of like modern film editing, everything that we think of as the way films are put together. So
well, and the editing here is so important, right?
Right, and
so,
I think that's what she's pointing out here is that as someone who has created that style, the technique of modern editing, if he had decided to make a shark movie instead of a serious Russian political drama or whatever, might have come up with Jaws.
I don't think there are any sharks in Russia as far as I know, but I could be wrong there.
I think Russia Sharks is definitely a B movie that I'm going to end up seeing probably.
Russia Sharks.
I don't know. Soviet Sharks. Funny. Soviet Sharks is a better title.
Yeah, well, it would be like if you could do like a USSR, right?
USS Shark.
Right. United Soviet Sharks of Russia or something like that.
I've seen ones with worse concepts. So
yeah. Anyway, Josh just mentioned Verna Fields, the legendary editor and executive who edited this and was suggested because she also edited American Graffiti.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, we talked about the technique of not showing the shark. And as much as the cinematography and the approach is important, I mean, the editing is something that's key to making that work and making that scary when you don't see it on screen.
And, a lot of that is, necessity is the mother of invention. Oh, we don't have footage of the shark. Well, let's cut what we do have.
Right, exactly. So I did want to find one more critical review. Charles Champlin in the Los Angeles Times said, "While I have no doubt that Jaws will make a bloody fortune, it is a coarse-grained and exploitive work which depends on excess for its impact. Ashore, it is a bore, awkwardly staged and lumpily written. If the whole project from manuscript forward has been a commercially calculated confection, the tip-off in the movie is the stubborn refusal of the key characters to come into sharp focus. Young Steven Spielberg, who was the director, shows as he has before an uncommon flair for handling big action. He and the script are much less successful in the man-to-man confrontations than in the man-to-shark meetings. Intimacy is not yet his strength."
And I will disagree with that. I really thought that there's this was the first movie shot on the Atlantic Ocean or on any ocean. And they went to Martha's Vineyard, I think, to create the town of Amity. And I think you get a great sense of that town and what all the characters feel about the town. I don't know. I don't get that at all.
Right. No, I agree with you. I just wanted to kind of include that perspective, and interesting, again, to see how people were regarding this at the time. But I'm with Ebert more that part of what works about this movie is that it does have well-drawn characters who we get to know before we throw them in this boat and against the shark. And it's not just constant shark attacks and gore and action. We do care about the characters, but he's not wasting time with boring character scenes where we're like, where's the damn shark attack already? It's very well paced.
Yeah, there's a momentum to it. And you find out about these characters like basically through their introductions, right? We know Brody, it's his first summer there. And we know that the mayor, played by Murray Hamilton, needs the summer dollars, and that Quint is a shark hunter and everything like that, so we know all these things right off the bat.
Right. And we get that, as you said, through their actions. When they're talking about things that are related to the plot, it is still revealing stuff about their characters. And I think that's good. Brody and his whole like fear of water, and you can tell. I feel like even in the scene that introduces Quint, where it's this like very contentious town meeting, and he does this thing where he scrapes his fingernails on the blackboard, and everyone kind of looks back at him, and you can almost just tell in the way they look at him how he's regarded in the town, where I feel like in the eyes of the characters in that scene, everyone's like, oh, this fucking guy. And that's what you need to know about him.
Well, yeah, I would think, they're like a summer beach town, and they have this like out of time shark hunting, Captain Ahab type there. I could see how they'd be like, dude, we're just trying to have a good summer.
Right, exactly. But I think that's an important aspect of his character. So, I mean, this is a major film I assume we had all seen before. When did you first see this, Jason?
I don't think I saw it till college, when I first took a Spielberg Scorsese class. And, just one of those classics that you figure you're going to catch at some time. And it's still great.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw this, I think, at some point when I was a kid, although I don't remember it really well. And then later on, I think maybe like 15 years ago, I was looking on Letterboxd, was the second time that I had watched it. And at that time, I had a fan of my work, this old lady in New Jersey who would email me all the time about my reviews and everything. It was a very, very nice woman. And she was always hounding me to watch Jaws again, because I think it was her favorite movie. And so in part, thanks to her encouragement, because I didn't really remember it from when I was a child, I watched it again at that time. And on my blog, joshbellhateseverything.com, I did a bunch of posts about shark movies over the course of several years related to Shark Week, where I posted eventually about all the Jaws movies and began with this one. So thank you, Nina Bine, rest in peace, for encouraging me to watch Jaws again.
Yeah, that's a good pick. I'm glad that she did that.
Yeah. Oh, no, me too. I mean, that was obviously, it's if you're going to have a favorite movie, like that's a good one to choose. So, Dave, did your parents show this to you at an inappropriately young age?
I'm sure it's one of my mom's favorites. Every shark movie is one of my mom's favorites. But yeah, I had seen it as a kid. I don't remember when, like, the last time I had seen it was until 2020. I watched it for a Breaking It Apart episode of Piecing It Together.
Yeah. Does your mom watch all the ridiculous, like Raiders of the Lost Shark and Close Encounters of the Shark Kind and all that stuff?
I am sure she's seen them all. If they play on, like, Sci-Fi Network or any of those kind of things, she watches them.
Nice. Those are real movies, by the way. Spielberg really such an influence on the shark genre in so many different ways.
Well, as we talked about while preparing, just on any animal attacks movie.
Yes, that as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like Star Wars, this is a movie that we could devote, an entire season of a podcast to. But is there anything major about the background you want to mention here in addition, Jason?
Quote from Steven Spielberg: "I thought my career as a filmmaker was over. I heard rumors that I would never work again because no one had ever taken a film 100 days over schedule." It was a 55-day scheduled shoot, and it took 159 days to actually make the movie.
Wow, yeah, that is a big difference. I feel like that's a lot of the time where we read that, these movies that turn out to be major classics and hugely popular films, and you hear about that and it's like, oh, well, it was worth it. It was all made sense. But then you read the literal exact same things about movies like Heaven's Gate that are giant failures. And, it could go either way when you
could go, it always could.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, we'll come back then in a moment and talk more of our general thoughts on Jaws. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year in this season premiere of our season on the films of 1975. We are talking about box office champion Jaws from Steven Spielberg. And I don't know if do we need to summarize the plot of this movie for people who may not remember?
Shark, beach town. Brody wants to shut it down. Mayor says, no, we got to have it open for the summer. Shark attacks and eats another kid. And now we gotta go on the ocean and get that shark. It's Roy Scheider and Sir Richard Dreyfuss, and of course our friend Robert Shaw as the three shark hunters here. One's an ecologist, one's a shark hunter, and one's the sheriff.
Yes,
who's afraid of the water, like you said.
He is, and I was waiting for some sort of like big reveal about why Brody is afraid of the water, like some specific traumatic event. But we never really get that. He just kind of doesn't like it. And then, of course, he has to go on the boat and he manages to do okay.
Yeah, I guess, look, I'm not going to criticize anything, but you could always be like, hey, why is Brody up in this small beach town? Like, what didn't work out for him in New York? And, how did he get sent to the one place where he wouldn't be as effective because he's afraid of the natural landscape there?
Right. Well, I didn't get the impression that he was sent there. I mean, they seem to talk about that they chose to go there. I mean, he does make some reference to the idea of there being so much crime in New York that you can't accomplish anything as a police officer, and they chose to come somewhere.
Right. I'm just saying, if you wanted to ratchet up internal conflict,
right,
you could have gone that route.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's okay to criticize, it's not necessarily a perfect film, or even if it is, that doesn't mean that we can't, have some sort of
I'm not anti-criticism. Yeah. I'll criticize you all day long.
Oh, thank you.
I just feel like this movie is pretty darn good. There's not much in there to criticize.
I mean, it is pretty darn good. Definitely. I feel like this is one of those movies that, and we've probably talked about this with some classic films where, especially if you haven't seen it before, it's been parodied and homaged and whatever so many times, and the various famous lines and famous scenes that it's hard to come to it fresh. And I feel like even having seen it a few times now, it's there's not as much impact from some of the cool stuff in it because it's so familiarized and chewed over and whatever, and also because there are so many other shark attack movies now, and very, very bad ones, many of them. But even the good ones have sort of lessened the impact of this movie, I think.
I guess you could say that from a story standpoint, from like a geek tech standpoint. There's always something to watch, and you're like, oh man, what a shot here, or look at what he did here. And Spielberg's such a master craftsman. It's always just fun to even watch how he's utilizing the craft to further the story.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's not fun to watch or that I don't enjoy it, because I do. And I enjoyed watching it again after, 15 years or whatever. And I think it was still fun. I mean, and it's an entertaining movie. Now I think Spielberg is this filmmaker who is sort of so canonized that a lot of his films, even if they're blockbuster type movies, were like, oh, this is a major event and this is so serious. But, this is still it's a piece of entertainment, and it's a really effective piece of entertainment. But, Spielberg was not Spielberg when he made this film, but he still does a great job with it.
Yeah, I saw this. I was watching the documentary. There's 1,000 documentaries on the making of this thing, right? And what went wrong. Anyway, they interviewed Daryl Zanuck, the producer, and they were like, before they made this movie, they're like, hey, Spielberg, are you just trying to help his career out? And he's like, no, I'm trying to help my career out by working with him. He just kind of had it even back then that he knew that Spielberg was like the wonder kid. It's called The Shark is Still Working, Josh.
The documentary. Yeah, that's, I haven't seen that. There was the DVD that I got had an older, like shorter, non-feature length documentary on it that I did not watch.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you for telling us.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think in part because that movie that you're talking about is like the one that is like the definitive documentary about the making of this film. So that's the one to watch if you do want to learn more about the making of Jaws. But yeah, I mean, even Spielberg, even if he's not like a wonderkind or whatever, I mean, one of the only movies he made prior to this that was successful was his debut film Duel, which was a TV movie, but still was very popular. And, I actually haven't seen, but I know it's also this kind of lean, relentless thriller about, I mean, it's a trucker who's going after the main character, but I'm sure that you would watch that film and think, hey, here's a guy who can make this suspenseful attack movie. Like, let's hire him. And that's, you don't even have to think about the larger, amazing talent that Spielberg had.
Well, it's interesting to compare it to today. I have seen Duel, and it's like a 2-lane blacktop, kind of grindhouse type thing. And but we talked about this in the last season, like, oh, someone made a cool little indie. Now let's give them Jurassic Park or Marvel, right?
Right.
But that doesn't mean they're going to have a point of view or hit it out of the park like he did,
Sure. No, I mean, I think part of the problem, though, is that a lot of times when they do that nowadays, it's like, well, we were talking about that in relation to Colin Trevorrow making Safety Not Guaranteed. And it's not like he made a small scale version of what a Marvel or Jurassic Park movie would be or whatever. I think you look at Duel and you can see, hey, this is basically like a more pared down version of the kind of movie that we're trying to make with Jaws. And so I think for whatever reason, directors nowadays who make smaller indie genre movies aren't the ones who get hired to make usually those big blockbuster genre movies.
Yeah, Zanuck had worked with him on Sugarland Express, so I think that's where he kind of was pulling that idea of like, hey, look, this dude is super talented and everything. So, you know what, Josh? He is super talented.
He is, yes. This was a risk that paid off for everyone involved, of course. And, I don't know if you want to talk about the alternate casting, which you
sure,
enjoy, but
sure, we can talk about that. There are so many ideas here.
Right.
Robert Duvall, they asked him to come on board, but he would only wanted to play Quint, which would have been interesting because Duvall's amazing.
Right. I feel like maybe Duvall, we think of him as that grizzled old character actor or whatever, but, he was, of course, much younger here. I don't know if he would have had the same level of experience that we get from Robert Shaw.
Yeah. And Charlton Heston wanted to play Brody. That would have been odd.
Yeah.
So, get your hands off me, you damn dirty shark. Lee Marvin, your boy Josh, and Sterling Hayden considered for Quint. And Hooper could have been anyone from John Voight, Timothy Bottoms, Jan Michael Vincent. Shout out to Jan Michael Vincent, Josh.
Sure.
And Kevin Kline, Joel Grey, and Jeff Bridges. Some good ones in there.
Yeah.
What I had read is the Dreyfuss character, they kind of made that into Spielberg's alter ego and, kind of push that. But when researching Robert Shaw, you come across like all these crazy stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is just a quote from Wikipedia. So Shaw also fled to Canada whenever he could due to tax problems, engaged in binge drinking, and developed a grudge against Richard Dreyfuss, who was getting rave reviews for his performance in Duddy Kravitz.
That was the movie that he did prior to Jaws. Richard
right,
Dreyfuss.
Which he thought was going to bomb, and that's why he took Jaws.
Right, and I mean, I'm not familiar with that Duddy Kravitz movie at all, but whether it bombed or not, obviously Jaws was the right choice for him after this, and he's great, and I do like the way that they make it. That character is very distinctive, because he's this like super nerd, and you learn a little later on that he's also like very wealthy, that he finances all his shark expeditions himself or whatever. But he's perfectly capable when they get out on the water. Quint is like mocking him relentlessly about being this coddled rich kid or whatever. But he's just as capable on the water as Quint is, because he's very dedicated to what he's doing, even if he comes at it from a very different background. So I like that there's the contrast between those characters, but I like that it's not, I feel like a movie now might be like, oh, hey, nerd, how you doing here out on the sea? And he'd be like seasick or something. And there's none of that.
Yeah. And I mean, if it was going to be anyone, it would have been Brody, who's not sea ready, right? But there's that great scene where the three of them are like having their bonding experience and singing, old sea shanties type songs and comparing injuries that they got on the sea. So I thought that was a good scene, to kind of just give you that palate cleanser before the, because it comes back where the shark is there again. And just to kind of showcase the relationship between these guys. Right.
They do eventually, they kind of develop this friendship, whereas Hooper and Brody kind of become friends almost instantly. And they bond over the fact that they're like the only ones who are taking this shark attack seriously while everyone else in town wants to just get back to the normal activities, especially the mayor, the Murray Hamilton character. But Quint resents both of them and really says that he wants to go out on his own and do this without them. And so they do form that bond in that scene, and it's good because it's it's one of those scenes, and I feel like it's a cliche in horror movies now, but maybe less so, where it's like the scene of the characters having a good time and they're singing those songs like you said, and we know that it's going to be interrupted by the monster returning, basically.
Right.
And there's a nice progression of, as they're singing and we hear the like bumping of the shark, and Spielberg shows us the close-ups of the boat shaking or whatever, and kind of one by one they stop with the songs as they realize what's going on. And I think is Quint first, and then Hooper, and then Brody's the last oblivious one, not realizing as he continues to sing that something's going on. And, that's revealing about character as well.
Yeah, I mean, for them to have written this on set and for it to turn out as well as it did is pretty incredible.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and there is there's a lot of dialogue and stuff that works here. It's not just we had to write a couple lines in between shark attacks or whatever. I mean, there's the whole famous monologue that Robert Shaw delivers about being on the USS Indianapolis, that I guess there's, differing accounts of who really wrote that whole thing. But whoever it was, like, it worked really well, and it's compelling to watch him deliver it. And it also reveals a lot about his character. So, whatever they did, it worked.
That is why you are the film critic, Josh, because of real tight analysis.
Thank you.
That.
Thank you.
Dave, have you ever heard this score?
I mean, I think so.
Is this the most famous score of all time, Dave?
Yeah, I think it probably is. I mean, is John Williams the most famous composer of all time? Yes. And is this his most famous score? Probably.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like maybe the Psycho, which has a similar kind of staccato thing, might be the only other one I can think of. Like,
what was the Star Wars song? No,
I mean,
Star Wars is
maybe,
up there.
but I feel like
Indiana Jones.
Yeah, I mean, all John Williams, but I feel like Indiana Jones and Star Wars, there's just like a lot of different themes that are all familiar, and it's kind of the totality of it. But with Jaws, it's that 2-note thing that everyone knows instantly.
Right. It's so simple, which is perfect because, it's just a shark, basically. Right. So it just fits so perfect, being so simple and natural.
Yeah.
Yeah. Williams said of that theme, he was trying to get it to grind away at you just as a shark would do. Instinctual, relentless, unstoppable.
Yes. And obviously it works. I mean, I don't think there's anyone who would say anything negative about that. And, again, going back to the lack of on-screen shark, the editing, the cinematography, the score is another thing that really conveys the danger and the scariness of that when you're not able to see the shark on screen.
Everyone just kind of somehow ratcheted up their game on this one, even though it was chaotic, right? You mentioned the cinematography. Bill Butler, the cinematographer, actually had to create new equipment so you could get those underwater shots. And it was cool that somehow they all convened and they were like, oh, this thing's a disaster, but the greatest disaster ever made on film, right?
Right. Yes.
I thought this was interesting, Josh. Spielberg asked the art department to avoid red in scenery and wardrobe, so the blood from the attacks would be the only red element and cause a bigger shock. And that reminded me of what he did so effectively in Schindler's List with the little girl in red, and that just kind of, breaks your heart when you see the result of that.
Right. When she got eaten by a shark.
That was not what happened.
I haven't seen Schindler's List, so I just assume that that's what happens in it.
Oh, man. Well, yeah. Josh Bell is the film critic of note on this show here. Yeah. What credibility is left for us?
Yeah. No, I that's a big blind spot for me. But I feel like that's what, I'm sure it's great, but that's one of those movies where it's like, unless if we do a podcast on it or something, but otherwise, if I'm like, I'm going to watch a movie today, I'm going to watch this like nearly 3-hour Holocaust movie, it just never comes up.
I mean, it's there for you if you want to watch it or be a completist or see a Best Picture winner or watch a masterpiece film or whatever you want, Josh.
Right. No, I know it's there. I just mean it never sort of like is the top of mind choice to like relax and watch a movie with.
Yeah, you are too busy watching like Shark Alien 9 or something like that.
Totally. Yes, I have recently watched Sharkula. But
see, there you go.
It was for an article.
Was that better or worse than Sharkenstein?
I haven't seen Sharkenstein, but I have seen Sharkula. So
Is Sharkenstein a real thing? I
yeah, I
said it
believe they're
only
from the same
because-
director.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
So-
Is there an Amityville Shark movie?
Yes.
There is an Amityville Shark movie, but sadly it's not titled Amityville Shark. It's titled Amityville Island. But I've seen that.
Oh.
That is, in fact, from
Oh.
the same director as Sharkula. So really,
Josh, why
really
didn't
all
you get
ties
that-
together here?
You should have got that guy on the podcast here, Josh,
Yeah.
since you know so much about
Yeah,
him.
Mark Polonia. I think he's probably available. So, so Jason, I realize that this movie is a classic, is one of the greatest movies ever made by a lot of metrics, and we all liked it. But do you have any criticisms?
No, Josh, as I said, I think it's, I'm not saying it's the best movie of all time, but it's just a great movie. So I'm good with it.
Yeah. Dave, did you enjoy it that much as well?
Kind of, yeah. Like I felt the same way where it's like, what am I really gonna, say about this movie? It's just a fun watch. Like I guess I could, say it's a little slow at times, maybe, but it's kind of not. Like it's just like a solid, fun action movie.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's not 90 minutes or whatever, but it doesn't necessarily feel slow, or it doesn't feel like it's ever poorly paced. I mean, I think all the shark attacks are sort of doled out throughout the movie at good intervals, right? I mean, we begin, of course, with a shark attack, and then every time there's sort of a lull, it's like, oh, remember the shark is here and is attacking.
Yeah.
And so I did appreciate that. And it was interesting to me, the pacing too, where it's like 2/3 of the movie or so, we're on the island. We have all these various characters. I mean, we have Brody and Quint and Hooper, but we also have the mayor, and we got Brody's wife, and we have various townspeople who have their own perspectives. And then they just all disappear. And the movie is just these three guys on the boat, and it doesn't really shift back. And I mean, I don't think that's bad. I just thought that was an interesting structure.
Mm.
I think, again, is this because of the necessity of what was going on? Because, hey, now we can actually shoot this. So let's be out here. And because they were, like I said, the first production ever shoot on an ocean, was it just a learning experience, or was it, hey, from a story standpoint, we're going from wide to narrow, and now it's all got to be about these guys versus the shark.
Right. Yeah. I don't know that that was a necessity thing. I think I saw something from Spielberg talking about how, they made all these changes to Benchley's book, but the part where it's just the guys on the boat versus the shark, he really wanted to keep that all intact. So maybe that's how the book is structured as well.
Yeah. I don't know. I do know that Benchley didn't think when he wrote it that they would even be able to make a movie. Because one, he didn't expect the book to be what a hit it was, but also because he didn't think the technology was there.
Right. Well, and apparently it wasn't, or they had to kind of invent it to make it be there.
They did invent it. Yeah.
So I will say, honestly, this time I found Quint kind of annoying. That not that Robert Shaw is bad, but I feel like some of the stuff you're maybe supposed to root for in his saltiness and is I know better than everyone. I was like, shut the fuck up, dude. You don't know better than everyone. And I kind of liked it when he died.
Yeah, Josh, you definitely know more about shark hunting than he does.
Not me, but Hooper.
Well, Hooper is not a shark hunter, Josh.
He's not a shark hunter, but he
conservationist.
is a shark expert.
Yeah.
I don't know.
All
I
right.
guess it's not that I didn't believe that he knew what he was talking about. It was just, the character is this guy who he's very stubborn, and he doesn't have any interest in hearing anyone else's perspective. And I don't know. I just found that slightly grating at times.
Shaw based his performance on fellow cast member Craig Kingsbury, a local fisherman, farmer, and legendary eccentric who played Ben Gardner in this film.
Oh yeah. Who ends up in a great scare, jump scare moment where you see his dead body
Floating
poking
body,
out.
yeah.
Yeah. That's a good moment.
Josh, like you said, we could probably, do a whole season on this thing, but I think we've kind of given our overall feelings on it. You believe you're a better shark hunter than Quint character. Dave and I like the movie. Should we rate the thing?
Yeah, let's do it. You want to rate it out of 5 shark attacks?
What?
I know. I'm so creative on
pick.
this episode.
Which are good things, right?
Yes.
4 shark attacks for me.
Yeah.
Just I could watch it again next week.
All
Great
right.
movie.
I'm going to give it 3.5 shark attacks. I think it's very good. It's certainly an important movie to see. I don't necessarily love it, but I appreciate its brilliance. So that's the kind of the highest I can go. Dave?
I'm going with 4 Shark Attacks. It's a classic.
It is a classic. Yeah. I mean, if you haven't seen Jaws, certainly see it. I can't imagine anyone will be dissatisfied really with Jaws, but you know, also watch Sharkula. No, don't watch Sharkula. Sharkula is horrible.
Well, Josh, maybe we could talk about some of the good animal attack movies in our next segment.
Indeed. We'll come back and talk about the legacy of Jaws. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1975, we are talking about box office champion Jaws. And I feel like just as much as we could spend an entire season talking about all the techniques and everything in this film, we could certainly spend an entire season unpacking the legacy of Jaws. As we talked about earlier, this is the beginning really of the blockbuster film and the way that blockbusters are marketed and released. And thanks to the success of this movie, we have shit like Michael Bay movies.
Well, I think back of that joint speech that Spielberg and Lucas gave at USC maybe a few years back, where they're like, we're getting to the point where movie theaters are just going to be big box office events and you're going to spend $50 and you could see something like Jaws, but you couldn't see a Sugarland Express in there, right? So it's interesting that he's like raging against the machine that he helped create.
Right. Well, I mean, to be fair, it's not like he foresaw all that when he made this movie or that he was even in charge of how the movie was released or marketed. But yeah,
and more than that, they're both champions of all types of films. So I think they want to add the variety out there.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I don't think we can blame them necessarily for that. We can blame the Russo brothers or
Marvel,
some other terrible people,
something like that. Josh, which I watched Piranha specifically because I saw a quote that Spielberg said that of all the animal attack movies that ripped off Jaws, that was his favorite. Sorry, Dave, no mention of Cocaine Bear.
Yeah. Well, it hadn't come out yet when he said that.
I guess he couldn't have predicted that one either. Piranha's pretty fun. It's we've talked about Roger Corman and John Sayles, who wrote it. Joe Dante directed it. It's a fun little movie.
Yeah, I'd like to see it. And I mean, there were a bunch of, that legacy goes on to this day with stuff like Cocaine Bear, obviously. But, in the immediate aftermath of Jaws, there were a bunch of those animal attack movies that were released in the next few years, including Piranha, as you said, Grizzly, Orca, Alligator, which was also written by John Sayles. I mean, all of those coming out in the next 5 years after this film. And I haven't gotten to those. I've seen the remake of Piranha that was directed by Alexander Aja, which is kind of fun. But Dave, I think, didn't you see Alligator?
Yeah, I watched Alligator just recently, and that was pretty fun. I also love that remake of Piranha, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole sort of cottage industry that sprung up after this. And I mean, not only those rip-off kind of animal attack movies, but of course, Peter Benchley, whose whole career as a novelist was about undersea adventure and animal attack type movies. There were numerous Peter Benchley adaptations, starting with The Deep in 1977, which also featured Robert Shaw and is not mainly a shark attack movie, although it does have one shark attack scene. I've seen that film, which is not great, but it does have an opening sort of 10-minute scene featuring Jacqueline Bisset, the star, diving underwater in a very see-through shirt. And that was a big part of its success, I think.
Well, Josh, I can't say the same thing about Piranha, which featured Murray Hamilton as a Texas kind of businessman. No see-through shirts on him.
Man, what a shame. But yeah, I did love looking at the list of Peter Benchley adaptations that came over the next 20 years. The Deep, The Island, The Beast, Creature. He really knew what his market was.
He got it right there. Spielberg, Josh, we've talked about before. Right now working on a John Williams documentary, a remake of Bullitt, or a modernization of it, and a limited series about Napoleon. I think all three will be great.
Yeah, I think we talked about that Napoleon thing in one of our Kubrick episodes, right? Because it's an adaptation of Kubrick's planned Napoleon film that he never made.
It all comes together.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of these people involved in this we've talked about before. Check out our episode on Close Encounters of the Third Kind. We talked about Spielberg there. We talked about Richard Dreyfuss as well, who, of course, went on to be a major star, even more so. Oscar nominations for The Goodbye Girl, which we also have an episode on, and Mr. Holland's
Nominations, sir. I won.
True. I'm sorry. I was gonna pause there and say we give you the chance for your Richard Dreyfuss impression.
Nah, we're good.
Sure?
Roy Scheider, of course, we did all that jazz. Yeah. That's my Roy Scheider. Oh, yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, pretty good.
We even talked about Murray Hamilton in our episode on The Graduate, but he was a very prolific character actor before and after this for the rest of his career. 3
Robert Shaw movies to check out: The Sting, A Man for All Seasons, which he got an Oscar nomination for, and the very cool 70s train heist film, The Taking of Pelham 123.
Yeah, I like The Taking of Pelham 123 a lot. Yeah, this was toward the end of Robert Shaw's career. He died in 1978, although he did make several more major films after Jaws, including The Deep, Black Sunday, and Robin and Marion. I haven't seen those other 2, but those were pretty big, successful films. So a major career. And obviously, as Jason, as you were talking about, quite a colorful life that he had.
Yeah, I like reading about him. It's fun to see all the things that he's done. Zanuck, we might have mentioned on our little episode about Driving Miss Daisy, which he produced. He was a legendary producer. And Carl Gottlieb co-wrote The Jerk.
Oh, yeah, nice. And he's, quite versatile. As you said, he plays the newspaper reporter here, in addition to having been the other credited writer along with Benchley on the script, and seemingly have done the most writing among all the various people. Jason, I know you have not seen any of the Jaws sequels, but I have, and you are smarter than me on that front.
Just in general, Josh,
So
I think
true.
we can agree. Yeah,
I will say that Jaws 2, which does feature Roy Scheider in a contractually obligated performance, which is the best kind of performance.
Yeah.
Is not
Actors always come in so happy to work
Yes.
when that's the reason.
Yeah, is not that bad. I mean, it basically rehashes the plot of this movie, but it is, as far as those sequels go, the most respectable one. It's back on Amity Island, and there's more shark attacks, and Brody is once again the only one who is convinced that there's some danger here, and he goes out. In that case, he goes after the shark by himself because the other characters are not around anymore. Jaws 3, which was released in 3D. I wonder if our friend Tony Strauss is a fan of Jaws 3D, if he's got that one on a 3D Blu-ray, but it's very, very bad and essentially has no real connection to the Jaws franchise. It has Dennis Quaid as the grown-up version of one of the Brody kids who now works at SeaWorld, where there are some shark attacks. And of course, the 4th film, Jaws: The Revenge, is infamous as like one of the worst movies ever made. And that featured the return of Lorraine Gary as Brody's wife, who travels to the Bahamas to escape Amity Island. And the shark follows her to the Bahamas.
It's the same shark.
It's weird because, of course, it's never actually the same shark because they always kill the shark. It's not like it's resurrected. But yeah, in Jaws: The Revenge, they imply that it is somehow, if not the same shark, like the shark's kid, or something like that. And it has this like psychic connection to the Brody family. And it goes from Amity Island all along the way, killing Brodies as it gets to the Bahamas, where she is with the character played by Michael Caine. And of course, there's that famous, I feel like one of the most famous quotes in Hollywood from Michael Caine about Jaws: The Revenge, where he said, "I have never seen it, but by all accounts, it is terrible. However, I have seen the house that it built, and it is terrific."
Yeah, that's a great
Classic.
quote.
Yes.
Josh, have you ever had cinematic neurosis?
Cinematic neurosis. What is
A condition in which viewers exhibit mental health disturbances or a worsening of existing mental health disturbances after viewing a film. The symptoms first presented as sleep disturbances and anxiety, but one day later, the patient was screaming, "Sharks, sharks," and experiencing convulsions.
Is this real? I feel like this is just like if you watch a horror movie and you have a nightmare. I didn't know there was a title for it or something.
I'm just wondering, because I was reading about that, and I was reading about the Jaws effect, where a bunch of like fishermen were like, we should just go kill sharks because of the movie Jaws, and they helped diminish the world's shark population.
Right. I mean, that is one of the real effects of this film that Peter Benchley in particular has talked about and has said that he regrets, is that this made people think that sharks were all dangerous and needed to be killed. And also in particular, Ron and Valerie Taylor, the like oceanographers who shot the real footage of sharks in this film, they really regretted their contribution to that. And there's an interesting documentary called Playing with Sharks about Valerie Taylor that I think is on Disney Plus that I've seen. And she talks a lot about that. And basically she spent her entire life dedicating herself to the preservation of sharks, in part to sort of make up for her contribution to Jaws.
Well, that's Hollywood for you.
I guess.
I don't know what to say.
I mean, hopefully cocaine bears won't become extinct now because of that film.
Dave is going to spend the rest of his life working on the preservation of cocaine.
Yes. Yeah. Dave, does your mom have a favorite ridiculous shark movie beyond Jaws? Do you know?
Well, not a shark movie, but I know she loves Orca. And she also loves Jaws the Revenge. So what are you gonna, what can you do?
Okay, well, we can forget about her taste at all there.
Whatever, Josh. You're here giving us reviews of Sharkula in the middle of our.
I'm not
Jaws
trying
thing.
to tell you that Sharkula is good. I'm trying to tell you that it's bad and you shouldn't watch it. But no, there are some good later shark movies. I mean, The Shallows with Blake Lively. I think Deep Blue Sea is really, it's totally ridiculous, but really entertaining in its ridiculousness. Both 47 Meters Down movies, I think, are really effective and really suspenseful. So there are good shark attack movies. It's just they're far outweighed by the terrible ones.
Well, that does it for this episode of Awesome Shark Year. And I think we wrap this thing up right here, Josh, huh?
Yeah, I feel like we should mention, you briefly mentioned that stage production, The Shark Is Broken.
Oh, right.
There's also a musical called Bruce, written by Richard Oberacker and Robert Taylor, who are Vegas guys. I feel like we should give them a shout out. They wrote the musical Bandstand as well, and they've been involved in stage productions here in Vegas. And that's a musical about the making of Jaws.
Well, The Shark Is Broken is also about that, and that's going to Broadway. That was written by Joseph Nixon and Ian Shaw. And Ian Shaw, Robert Shaw's son, is starring in it, I believe, as his father.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, Bruce, the other one from our hometown heroes, sadly, not going to Broadway. But I mean, really, is there room for 2 Broadway plays about the making of Jaws?
Let's find out.
Yeah. I did also briefly just want to mention how this movie, kind of had added resonance during the response to the COVID pandemic, and a lot of people talking about how Murray Hamilton's character, the mayor, is emblematic of the way that politicians reacted to COVID. Sadly,
but need your summer dollar.
Right, exactly. I mean, you saw that footage of like people on spring break in Florida, right, as the pandemic was first spreading, and I think a lot of people connected that to the beach footage in Jaws. And of course, election related to, people always talk about how the mayor is still the mayor in Jaws too. So make sure to vote. That's all I wanted to add there.
Fair enough, sir.
So that is Jaws, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can attack us online and on social media.
Or just sing us old sea shanties, if you will. I'm Jason Harris Comedy on all the socials, or Jay Harris Comedy. I had an old website, Go for Jason. Did a shark eat it? Maybe. But my new website, Eat This Comedy, is also on Instagram. That's up. You can find me on Letterboxd at Go for Jason. We're at awesomemovieyear.com and Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram. Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter.
And I always knock my website, joshbellhateseverything.com, but it's actually quite relevant in this episode because it has tons of posts about shark movies that I did over several years related to Shark Week. I think there's probably 35 shark movie posts or something on there, including about all the Jaws movies. So check that out. I'm also at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, at Signal Bleed on Twitter, and at Signal Bleed on Letterboxd. And you can listen to our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also go back and listen to that Jaws episode that my mom makes a special appearance on. And of course, follow us on social media at Piecing Pod.
Jason, what do we have in our next episode?
Josh, it's the first feature, another iconic film of 1975. It's Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
So tune in next time for Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.